Corpus Christi's two main reservoirs are at 8% capacity. That is not a seasonal dip. That is a city of 317,000 people watching its water supply vanish in real time, with no promise that rain, emergency wells, or $1 billion in building projects will replace it before the taps start shutting off this November. How does a coastal city with a major port, 1 million barrels of daily refining capacity, and 500,000 water customers end up 6 months from running dry? The answer sits in two reservoirs that are supposed to keep this region alive: Choke Canyon Reservoir on the Frio River and Lake Corpus Christi on the Nueces River. Together, these two bodies of water provide more than 95% of the city's surface water supply. And together, they are nearly empty. Satellite photos show Choke Canyon's collapse over 5 years, from 47% capacity in October 2021 to under 10% today. The water has pulled back so far from the original shoreline that the bare lakebed stretches for miles in every direction, cracked clay baking under triple-digit South Texas heat. Lake Corpus Christi sits just above 9%. Boat ramps that used to reach the waterline now end hundreds of feet from the nearest puddle. The countdown keeps getting worse. The city's online water dashboard first predicted these reservoirs could hold out until March 2027. Then, the state changed the number. A March 17th emergency warning said both Nueces Basin reservoirs could be drained as soon as May 2026. 5 different predictions have been run, and the spread is huge. In the worst case, usable water runs out this summer. In the best case, with emergency wells and normal rainfall, the system holds steady. The number the city is planning around now is September for forced cuts, and there is no scenario on the table that includes real rainfall in the forecast. 89% of Texas is in drought as of March 31st. More than half of Nueces County sits in extreme drought. Large parts of South Texas received less than 10% of normal rainfall in March alone. The Nueces River, which is supposed to feed Lake Corpus Christi, has basically stopped flowing. The Frio River, which feeds Choke Canyon, is barely a trickle. Both rivers depend on seasonal thunderstorms and tropical moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, and 5 straight years of record heat and failed rainy seasons have starved them dry. Refilling these reservoirs would require 20 or more inches of rain in a short period, or steady above normal rainfall kept up over many months. Neither is in the forecast. And these reservoirs never fully bounced back from the last drought. They were already low when this one started, which means the city has been running on a shrinking margin for years without building enough backup supply to cover it. The one thing standing between Corpus Christi and dry taps is a 101-mile pipeline running northeast through the flat coastal prairies of South Texas to Lake Texana. It is called the Mary Rhodes Pipeline, a 64-inch steel artery that delivers raw water from Texana to the city's O.N. Stevens water treatment plant. It is named for the former mayor who pushed the project through during an earlier drought crisis and lost her battle with cancer shortly before it was finished. That crisis, in the mid-1990s, brought the same two reservoirs down to about 25% and threatened to shut down the region's economy. The pipeline was the fix, a $200 million-plus emergency lifeline that took years to build and was supposed to make sure Corpus Christi never faced this kind of threat again. 3 decades later, the pipeline is the only reason water still flows from the treatment plant to 500,000 customers. On a good day, the pipeline delivers between 72 and 79 million gallons. That is somewhere between 50 and 70% of everything the city drinks, cooks with, bathes in, and runs through its industrial cooling towers. The pipeline is running at Schedule 4, its absolute maximum. Every gallon it can physically move, it is moving. But Mary Rhodes has never been bulletproof. Since it opened, the pipeline has sprung 33 separate leaks or failures. A major break in 2022 forced engineers to lower the pressure and cap flow at 55 million gallons per day for months. Internal checks rate the pipeline's health a 7 out of 10. The city spent millions on emergency repairs and upgrades just to push it back to full output. And there are claims that Corpus Christi underused the pipeline for years before the crisis, skipping past tens of billions of gallons of already purchased Texana water to save on electricity costs. The city insists that choice was an engineering call after the 2022 break, but the result is the same either way. The reservoirs that were supposed to serve as the main supply are now basically empty, and the pipeline that was built as a backup is carrying everything. The same system that was built to save this city once before is now the only thing keeping it alive. And it is not enough. Lake Texana itself is dropping. It sat at 55% in March. Forecasts show it falling toward 30% by midsummer. The lifeline is draining from both ends. On March 18th, Governor Abbott signed a package of emergency orders aimed at buying time. The orders skip normal permit rules, letting the city pump emergency groundwater straight into the Nueces River and send it downstream to the treatment plant without months of review. They changed Lake Texana's drought water sharing rules. Instead of cutting Corpus Christi's supply 10% when Texana drops to 50%, the cut is now delayed until 40%. That buys roughly 1 extra month of full pipeline flow. But when the cut finally hits, it doubles to 20%. Abbott's tone toward the city has been aggressive. In March, he publicly threatened to have the state take over and micromanage Corpus Christi's water choices if local leaders could not act. A month later, after the city council delayed action on the desalination plant, he went further, calling Corpus Christi a victim not of drought, but of its own failure to make choices. The mayor responded by calling an emergency meeting on April 9th to restart desalination talks. The political tension between the state capital and the coastal city is running almost as hot as the drought itself. But the bad math is not done with Corpus Christi yet. Not even close. Even with emergency powers, bent water sharing rules, and fast-tracked permits, the city needs 60 million gallons per day of new water supply before November. It is nowhere near that number, and the fight for what remains makes the gap even harder to close. Corpus Christi sits at the center of one of the largest oil and chemical stretches in the United States. The refineries and chemical plants lining the ship channel process 1 million barrels of crude oil every single day. Flint Hills Resources runs 2 plants producing gasoline for San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Valero runs its West Refinery. Citgo runs 2 more. ExxonMobil and SABIC's Gulf Coast Growth Ventures plastics plant, which came online in 2022, pulls roughly 13 million gallons per day from the same system that serves home faucets. Steel Dynamics takes another 6 million. A Tesla lithium refinery in Robstown draws between 1 and 3 million gallons daily, with potential peaks up to 8. Avena Clean Hydrogen has locked-in rights to 5.5 million more. All told, industrial customers use between 30 and 35 million gallons per day. That is roughly 60% of the entire system supply going to cooling towers, processing units, and heavy manufacturing, not to kitchen sinks and showers. The region's refining capacity produces about 5% of the entire country's gasoline and jet fuel. Roughly 115,000 jobs across the coastal bend depend on these operations staying wet. And here is where the politics get ugly. 8 of the largest industrial users, including Valero, Citgo, and Flint Hills, hold something called a drought surcharge pass. Years ago, they prepaid 31 cents per 1,000 gallons into an insurance-style program, buying protection from drought-related rate hikes. Whether those old contracts shield them from the 25% forced cuts, the city is now considering is a legal question nobody has answered yet. If they do, the full weight lands on households and small businesses that have already been rationing for 3 years. If they do not, refinery shutdowns start rippling through the national fuel supply chain. A safe wind-down of a refinery takes days. Restarting it after water is restored takes weeks. Either outcome is going to involve lawyers. The industrial users are not sitting still. Flint Hills signed a deal in January to pull 1.5 million gallons per day from the Allison wastewater treatment plant using temporary filtering. ExxonMobil drilled test wells on its own property, but the water came up too salty to use without reverse osmosis treatment. Multiple companies are drilling private wells. But none of these efforts come close to replacing what the city water system provides. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. This channel covers water crises and the geography shaping them every week. While the city fights over who gets cut and by how much, something else is happening underneath the surface. The emergency pumping is creating a second crisis underground. The city's plan is simple in concept, but messy in practice. Drill wells, pump groundwater into the Nueces River, let it flow downstream to the treatment plant. Well fields in Nueces County are already pushing over 8 million gallons per day into the river. The Evangeline Groundwater Project in San Patricio County, the city's single biggest near-term bet, aims to deliver 24 million gallons per day by December through a network of 24 wells and a new pipeline straight to the O.N. Stevens treatment plant. A portable, slightly salty water desalination unit at the plant, built by FCC Aqualia, carries a $43.5 million price tag. The City Council has approved up to $120 million in emergency building contracts for pump stations and pipe systems connecting these new sources to the treatment plant. Combined, these new pumping projects are pulling water from underground water layers at more than 1,000% above what is considered a safe pumping rate. That number is not a misprint. Ranchers in Jim Wells County are already reporting wells going dry for days at a time. One rancher spent $30,000 drilling a backup well after losing water for 3 straight days. The city of Sinton has filed legal challenges over concerns about lasting damage to the underground water supply. Corpus Christi is solving one water emergency by possibly draining the water table underneath its neighbors. The desalination project, the one that was supposed to make all of this pointless, sits at the center of a decade of failure that the city is still paying for today. Plans for a seawater desalination plant on Corpus Christi Bay have been floating around since at least 2016, when a study called it the city's best path to drought-proof water supply. It never moved forward. Cost blowouts, worries about salty waste being dumped into the shallow bay, political fights between the city and the Port of Corpus Christi Authority, and a revolving door of hired planners and proposals kept the project from breaking ground. Meanwhile, industrial growth kept going. ExxonMobil's plastics plant came online in 2022. Steel Dynamics opened. Tesla's lithium refinery started drawing water. Each new plant locked in millions of gallons per day from a system that was planning to build new supply, but had not actually built any of it yet. The water deals were set against rainfall averages from a wetter decade, and there is no way to scale them back when the rain stops. The first group's bid came in at $1.3 billion. Too expensive. The council turned it down in 2025. A second group, Corpus Christi Desal Partners, submitted a new proposal in February at $979 million, a 25% drop. The council voted 5-3 to begin contract talks. Then, in April, the lead modeler at the consulting firm running the Bay Impact Study left the company. That triggered a 30-day delay on the final council vote. The plant is designed to produce 30 million gallons per day. If built, it would reshape the city's long-term water future. It cannot come online fast enough to affect the November deadline, and it still has not survived a final vote. A privately owned desalination plant in Nueces County could add another 9 million gallons per day, but output would not start until roughly a year after signing. The larger Harbor Island project, targeting 50 million gallons per day, is not set to run until 2029. The closest source of scale is the Evangeline project, and that depends on clearing legal fights and finishing pipeline building in 8 months. So, the question that hangs over everything is, what happens if the gap is not closed in time? The answer is laid out in the city's emergency water plan. When supply is expected to fall short of demand within 180 days, a Level 1 water emergency triggers. Based on current forecasts, that trigger date is September 2026. Under Level 1, every customer class takes a flat 25% cut. Households get a monthly limit of 5,250 gallons. About 30% of the city's 91,000 home accounts already go past that. Usage above 7,000 gallons per month gets a $4 extra charge per 1,000 gallons. Violations count as a Class C misdemeanor, with fines up to $500 and forced water shutoffs of at least one billing cycle for repeat offenders. The target is to cut 15.7 million gallons per day from total demand, and none of that drop is expected to come from households. Residents have already been squeezed through 3 years of growing restrictions. Corpus Christi has been under Stage 3 forced conservation since December 2024, when combined reservoir storage dropped below 20%. No lawn watering with sprinklers since 2023, 2-day-per-week watering limits, car washing restricted, pools unfilled. Yards across the city sit brown and dried out, and under Texas law, homeowners groups cannot fine residents for it during active city water rule. There is nothing left to take from home users. They have been squeezed for all they can give. The entire 15.7 million gallon cut has to come from large industrial and commercial customers, the same refineries and chemical plants that keep 5% of the nation's fuel supply flowing. The logic for not forcing industrial cuts yet is simple, if painful. Wrecking the local economy solves nothing. It is a race against time. and the city is betting it can build new supply before it has to shut down the refineries that keep the region employed. The council voted with every member in favor on April 28th to delay action on the water cut plan. Enforcement questions are unanswered. The drought pass contracts are legally untested. And the truth that forcing refineries to cut cooling water carries safety risks, since you cannot just shut off water to a chemical plant the way you turn off a sprinkler, has no clean answer. Cooling towers stop overheating that can lead to equipment failure and worse. A safe wind down of a major refinery takes days to weeks. Restarting after water returns takes even longer. Cutting water supply to active processing units is not something you can dial down slowly. It is all or nothing. Either the cooling system works or the plant shuts down. If conditions get worse past level 1, the city may have to rotate water across service areas. One neighborhood gets water, while another gets nothing, cycling through the system on a schedule. Rolling blackouts, except for drinking water instead of electricity. Smaller cities on the same system are already bracing. Beeville declared its own disaster in October 2025 and has taken on $35 million in city bonds, roughly $2,600 per resident, to fund an emergency slightly salty groundwater plant. The town of Taft declared a disaster on April 21st. These towns do not have the budget or the systems to build their way out alone. The worst-case forecast comes down to 3 words: controlled depression, mass unemployment, industrial total shutdown. No modern American city has ever fully run out of water. Corpus Christi could be the first. The comparison that keeps coming up is Cape Town, South Africa, which in 2018 came within weeks of its own day zero before strict 50-liter per person limits, and the return of rainfall pulled it back from the edge. Cape Town ran a public countdown clock. It posted usage data for every household. It shamed high users by name. And it worked, because Cape Town's crisis was almost entirely about homes. People shortened showers, caught rainwater in buckets, rationed every drop, and bought the city enough time for the weather to break. In Corpus Christi, that playbook does not work the same way. More than half the water goes to industrial cooling systems in refineries that cannot simply be told to use less. You do not ration cooling water from a chemical plant the way you ration a shower. The equipment overheats. The process fails. The physics do not bend. And unlike Cape Town, where the city controlled its own water future through what each person chose to do, Corpus Christi's fate depends on whether a handful of big industrial users, the weather, and a building timeline for projects that do not exist yet all line up before November. The pieces are not in any single person's hands. And Corpus Christi is not alone in watching this unfold. El Paso's main reservoir, Elephant Butte, sits at 12.8%. The combined storage of Amistad and Falcon on the lower Rio Grande is 25.5%, roughly 30 percentage points below where it should be. Across the state, reservoir storage sits at 74%, about 8 points below the seasonal average. If no new water sources are built, Texas faces an estimated $153 billion in yearly drought damage by 2070. Climate forecasts show conditions growing drier than any megadrought Texas has seen in the last 1,000 years by the second half of this century. Texas has not built a new major reservoir since the 1960s. The population has roughly tripled since then. The industrial water demand has grown even faster, and the rainfall patterns those older systems were designed around are shifting underneath them. Corpus Christi is not a one-off. It is a preview of what happens when a growing population, growing industry, and a changing climate crash into systems that were built for a wetter world. The reservoirs are still dropping. The wells are still being drilled. The desalination vote is still pending. The 2026 Atlantic hurricane season begins in June, and a single tropical system tracking up the Nueces Basin could deliver the kind of rainfall that refills everything overnight. But planning a city's survival around the hope that a hurricane shows up in the right place is not a water strategy. It is a prayer. And 317,000 people are still counting on someone, the city, the state, the weather, to close a 60 million gallon gap before the calendar runs out. Whether that gap closes in time is not just a question for Corpus Christi. It is a question for every water system in the American Southwest still built on the belief that the rain will always come back. If you want to see how this connects to the water crisis already reshaping the Colorado River Basin, that video is on screen now.